You are the founder of the African Poetry Book Fund. Among other projects that you pursue is an annual box set published by Akashic Books. Can you talk about the purpose of this project and say a few words about this year's box set?
Yeah, so one of the things I like to do first, we started the African Poetry Book Fund about 6 years ago, but it began out of a desire, out of a gap, out of something that was a significant and obvious gap, which was quite crudely put. There were not enough African poets being published anywhere. If you ask the average person, it may be the case still, but if you ask the average person 6-7 years ago to name a few African poets, the last book of poems by an African that they had read or bought, you'd be hard pressed for anybody to even have a name. People would know Wole Soyinka as a playwright. People would know Chinua Achebe. People would know Chimamanda Adichie. People would know a whole range of novelists and fiction writers, to some extent some playwrights and some. But in terms of poets, I think people are hard pressed to do that. But what it did belie is the fact that there are poets writing consistently and have been writing consistently throughout Africa. So we identified a simple task. A simple task was to say, we're going to try and find a way to see the publication of African poets by whatever means we can work through, because we identified a series of fissures in the system that prevented it, fissures that have to do with sort of old racist perceptions of Africa, structures that are part of the economic structure that surrounds the publishing, and the number of different barriers to access and to engage with African writing. So in the space of 6 years, we've seen published about almost 100 African poets. This is in chapbooks or full-length collections, anthologies, and so on. These have our imprint in conjunction with other entities. I think I did an interesting review of African poetry, or African Poetry Book Fund impact in America. And I don't think there's any organization, any publisher who can claim to have published that many Black poets in this country in that space of time. It doesn't even exist. And I'm talking about anybody. So, and that is because our target was to say Africa and the embrace of Africa has a long tradition in the New World, an important tradition of using that as a weapon against the oppression of Black people through the systems of colonialism, which American society is deeply involved in, and the ways in which Africa was perceived, and therefore by extension Black people were perceived as lacking understanding and knowledge and so on. Because the very premise of American literature, despite its revolutionary movement away from Europe and its quest to do that, again, in that complex way of a double-mindedness in American society, it is also predicated on the foundation of the European presence. The foundation meaning we still sort of see ourselves carrying a peculiar lineage through Shakespeare, through to the Greeks and so on and so forth. Well, what happens with Africans is that we, by insulting, by creating a negative view of Africa, the people who are African descendants inherit by force that same negative view in their own work. And people like Langston Hughes and Amir Baraka, and as early as W.B. Du Bois, and all of these folks were saying, and Marcus Garvey was saying, if we don't have a beauty of Africa, we then, as an antecedent to who we are, then we will continue to have a negative view of ourselves. So APBF is predicated on that idea that as we demonstrate what exists, which is the great intellectual, emotional, and powerful literary practice of multiple places in Africa, the impact that can have on the rest of the world, what we want to do is to shine the light on it and to make it accessible and make it possible for these writers to write really powerful and wonderful things. I think that's what we are doing. I think that's what we've achieved. I think it's been transformative in America, and it's certainly been transformative in Africa.